Hey everybody, it's Rod coming back at you with another video from the PhotoFair. Today I want to follow up on one of my Couve camera blogs about a lens that I never managed to get in all the years of photography until just recently. And I gotta tell you, this is one of those lenses where it's like, where have you been all my life? I haven't been on camera store shelves and me walking by it, but not anymore. So what lens is it? Well, it's Canon's 24 1.4 L series lens. It's a lens, over the years, I've seen them, but I just never really said, I gotta have that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And this dates all the way back to when I was shooting FD lenses in the 80s. And I had a whole suite of lenses. I had 17 Canon prime lenses back in those days. I mean, I was a nut. I was buying everything. And I liked high-speed glass. So why the heck didn't I get this lens? There's a little story behind that. Before I get into that, we do have another PhotoFair show coming up in Newark, California at the Newark Pavilion on February 22nd. I hope you can be with us. It's going to be a great show. You can find great deals on lenses just like this 24 1.4. In fact, I got this lens at the last show in Newark from one of the dealers there. Gave me a good deal on it. I'm really happy with it. So anyway, also if you're interested in Couve Camera, the blog, I've got a link down below that'll take you to that site. I've got dozens and dozens of articles on various lenses and cameras and so on. Okay, so back in the 1980s, I was really a guy that really liked to shoot prime glass. Part of that was because zoom lenses back in those days, either you gave up some optical quality or they were enormous and they were almost always slower than their prime counterparts. It really wasn't until the very late 1980s and into the 90s where we started getting a quality lens like an 80 to 200 2.8 or 70 to 200 2.8. These kinds of lenses that I think a lot of photographers take for granted today. You know, you may not realize in the 1980s, those kinds of lenses really didn't exist, especially the early part of the 1980s. And really you found yourself shooting primes a lot more than zooms. So I had a whole bunch of prime lenses, and I always felt that 24 was kind of that trying to do it all, not doing anything well. And I know that's not true, so I know some of you might put a comment in there, what do you mean? You know, because 24 is a very popular focal length. But I always felt like it was just a little bit too wide for a standard wide-angle shot, like a group shot, a family photo or something, because it was wide enough where even the good ones would kind of stretch stuff out a little bit towards the edges. And so I never really liked that for that kind of a photo where you had a lot of people in it, especially if somebody was going to be near the edge of the frame. So it wasn't really, though, wide enough to really get you a dramatic landscape where you've got the rock in the foreground that looks really huge and then it just goes off into infinity into the background. That you really needed something more like a 20 or a 17. And if you had the big bucks, Canon had a 14mm f2.8L lens as well. You know, I shot Canon, so that would have been the lens I would have got. And at one point I did have a 14 2.8. I ended up with a high-speed 28 f2. That was the fastest 28 at that time that Canon made. And then I also had the 20 2.8. And I had a 17 and a 14, you know, I had a 35 and a 50. So I had all these different lenses because I had all these primes. But I never felt I needed to fill the gap between 20 and 28. And honestly, I really didn't. But the 24 1.4L was always out there. Switched over to the EF system in the 90s. Had a 20. Didn't have a 24. I did have a zoom lens that went from 28 to 105. It was just a kit lens, but it was decent, and I really didn't shoot that focal range much at that point in my life. Later on, when I got into the digital full-frame cameras, I ended up with a 24 105L, which is a decent lens. And again, don't use that all that much. But I do have, you know, ultra wides. I've got a 16 to 35L, and that's a great lens. So I was at the last PhotoFair and saw this lens sitting on a table. I started chatting with the guy, and I, you know, wheeled and dealed a little bit. He wanted $500. I asked him if he'd take 400. He thought about it. I came back around. He said, okay. So I felt like I got a really good deal. Now, you can see the lens here. It's pretty banged up, and I kind of like them that way. This was used by a professional photographer or a serious amateur that travels everywhere and goes out in the jungle or whatever, because this thing's pretty banged up. But it worked perfectly. You see, at the camera shows, you can put it on your body. You know, I asked the guy, hey, can I take a picture? I snapped a few photos, made the autofocus go from near to far, and made sure it wasn't making any funny noises and, you know, all of that stuff. Nothing's rattling around in there. You look through it with a flashlight, make sure you don't get a bunch of fungus growing in there or anything like that. The glass was really great. So I felt like that was a really good deal for a lens that when it came out in 1997, it was over $2,000. Now, of course, in 2007, they replaced it with the Mark II version. And the Mark II version had some improvements to the optics so that when you shoot it wide open, it's a little bit sharper in the center wide open, and it's quite a bit sharper out on the edges wide open. So they made some improvements because cameras were just getting better and better and better, and now it started, you know, people started to notice that this original lens was not tack sharp out there on the corners. Now, I was willing to give that up. I wasn't even convinced, even after buying this thing, that this was a lens that I was going to keep or like. That's part of one of the reasons why I was hoping to get a good deal on it, because if I decided I didn't like it, I could just resell it and get my money back. That's another joy about buying used equipment. So after the show, I start playing around with it. It did not take me very long at all to have that epiphany, where has this lens been all my life? It was fantastic. Being able to get up close, this lens will focus to 9 inches, being able to get up close to a nearby object, a rock, a planter box, whatever, something in the foreground, and then be able to have a fairly wide, expansive shot, but throw that background completely out of focus. That's hard to do with a wide-angle lens, because wide-angle lenses naturally have more depth of field. So it was wonderful. I just started seeing all kinds of images that I could make with this lens that I've really never been able to make before. And so I got real excited about this lens, and I'm still excited about it. I still have it. I might even sell this one and buy the Mark II. Or maybe take a look at Sigma's Art 24 1.4, which is supposed to be spectacular as well. I'll show you some photos, and you can tell me what you think. I haven't done a lot with it. It's wintertime, so I got snowflakes flying around outside right now. So maybe I'll do a snowy scene after it lays on the ground. Anyway, take a look. Right? I mean, it's kind of cool. It's a great lens. I can really highly recommend a 24 1.4 if you're shooting full frame. I even use this lens with a focal reducer, one of my autofocus focal reducers, and I made a video recently with that setup, and because I was actually using my EOS R in that video, and I wanted to try the 24 as a video lens, and it did really well. And that was basically turned it into an f1 lens. So that was kind of cool. I love it. I love the 24 1.4. Highly recommend it. You can get, Nikon makes one of these. Sony makes one. Sigma, of course, again, has that art lens that's very well reputed and pretty reasonably priced, and they make that for Canon and Sony and Nikon. So you get a lot of options out there for this focal length. It's fantastic. I really like it. So again, don't forget, we've got a camera show coming up at the Newark Pavilion on February the 22nd. I really hope you guys can come out if you're in the Bay Area. If not, stay tuned right here for more videos right here on YouTube. Also hope you'll give me a subscribe so you can see these videos as we bring them out, and go ahead and hit the like button on this one if you like the video. Until the next video, thanks for watching.